In the third week of March 1963, a powderman named Raymond Holt walked the crest of a dolomite quarry cut into the bluffs above the Wisconsin River, a few miles outside Muscoda in Grant County, Wisconsin, checking the wiring on a line of charges his crew had loaded that morning. Holt was 41 years old. He had fired shots at that quarry for 11 years, and at quarries in Iowa and Illinois for a decade before that, and in all of that time the rock had behaved the way rock behaves. The face came down in a sheet. The broken stone rolled out across the floor of the pit. The dust rose, drifted and cleared, and the loaders moved in. On the afternoon of March 19th, the dust did not clear the way it should have. It bent. Men standing at the rim of the pit watched the grey cloud fold and pour into a dark seam at the base of the newly broken face, as though the hill behind the rock were drawing a breath. When Holt climbed down and put his lamp to that seam, he was looking into a space the blast had not made. The blast had only opened a door. Behind roughly 4 feet of undisturbed dolomite was a chamber with a level floor, dressed walls, and a ceiling blackened by very old smoke. Within 4 days, every man who had seen the inside of it would sign a piece of paper agreeing never to describe it again. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Almost nothing about that quarry survives in the ordinary way. It was a small crushed stone operation supplying road aggregate to county and state contracts, run out of an office in Prairie du Chien, and the company's working files were destroyed in an office fire in the early 1970s, a fire that the local record treats as unremarkable and that this account will treat the same way. What survives is narrower and harder. It consists of the recollections of 6 men who were on the pit floor that week, recorded separately across the following decades, most of them late in life. It consists of a 2-sentence item in the local weekly paper dated March 21, 1963, stating that blasting at the quarry had been suspended pending an inspection. And it consists of 1 physical document, the quarry's shot log, a bound ledger in which every blast fired at the site had been entered by hand, in sequence, since April of 1934. The ledger passed to the County Historical Society when the operation wound down. It can be examined today. Its entries run in an unbroken daily rhythm for 29 years, and then, for the 20th, 21st, and 22nd of March 1963, the pages are blank. The next entry is dated March 23rd. It is written in a different hand, and it records tonnage as though the week had been ordinary. The 6 accounts do not agree on everything. Men who witness the same event rarely do, and men describing it 30 and 40 years later agree even less. But the accounts converge, with a consistency that matters, on the physical facts of the chamber itself, and it is worth setting those facts down the way the witnesses set them down, in dimensions and materials, because the dimensions and the materials are the argument. The space behind the broken face was roughly 22 feet long, 11 feet wide, and a little over 9 feet from floor to ceiling. The floor was not rubble, and it was not natural bedding plane. It was worked flat. One of the men, a loader operator who had poured concrete for bridge footings before the war, later said the floor was truer than most slabs he had finished, level enough that spilled water from a canteen sat in place instead of running. The walls carried long, parallel grooves, evenly spaced, the kind of marking left by repeated blows of a heavy tool traveling in the same line, and the corners where wall met floor turned at a consistent angle down the full length of the room. Along the base of the north wall ran a cut channel, about 4 inches wide and 4 deep, falling gently toward a natural fissure at the far end. It was a drain. Someone had engineered the removal of water from a room carved inside a Wisconsin bluff. The ceiling told the second half of the story. It was domed with soot, a continuous black skin thickest at the center, and the upper faces of the walls were sheeted with thin, curved plates of stone that had cracked and half detached, the way rock cracks when it is heated by fire and then quenched with cold water. On the floor beneath lay a lens of ash and charcoal that the men who stepped in it described as ankle deep. This is fire setting. It is a specific and demanding mining technique, Fire built against the rock face, water thrown against the heated stone, the fractured sheet then broken down with hammers, and it is not a technique anyone stumbles into. It appears in the ancient copper mines of the Sinai, in the silver workings of Greece, in the gold mines of Egypt, and, as the physical evidence of fire-cracked rock and ash deposits confirms, in the ancient copper pits of the Lake Superior Basin, 400 miles north of the Muscoda Bluffs. The technique is a signature of a mining tradition transmitted across generations of underground work, because the timing of the quench, the management of smoke in an enclosed space, and the reading of a heated face are learned at the rock, from someone who already knows them. A single fire tells you nothing. A domed skin of soot laid down over years, above an ankle-deep bed of ash, tells you the room was worked that way as a matter of routine. It was written across the ceiling of a sealed room in Grant County, and the room had been sealed. This detail recurs in every account. The blast had not simply broken into a void, it had sheared away the outer courses of a closed entry, a passage roughly 3 feet wide that had been shut, deliberately, with dry laid blocks of dressed stone, fitted tightly enough that the men could not slide a knife blade between the courses that remained. The blocks were finished on their inner faces. Whoever closed that passage had done the finishing work from inside the passage, or had cared enough about the closure to dress stone that no one was ever meant to see. What the crew found inside the room they closed was equally deliberate. Against the east wall, set in 2 neat rows, were stone mauls, heavy hammering tools of dark, dense rock, each one girdled by a pecked groove for a handle lashing. The accounts differ on the count. The number that recurs is between 15 and 20. Near them lay a small quantity of native copper, unsmelted metallic copper, including one worked piece the length of a man's hand, drawn to an edge at one end like a chisel or gad. And that was all. There were no bones, there were no sleeping ledges, no food refuse, no broken hafts, no scatter of the ordinary debris that accumulates wherever human beings work for any length of time. The room had been cleaned, the tools racked, the drain left clear, and the door built shut. Anyone who has spent a working life around excavations understands the difference between a site that was abandoned and a site that was closed. Abandonment leaves a mess. This room had been put in order. The stone of the mauls is its own piece of evidence. The bluffs around Muscoda are dolomite and sandstone. The mauls, by every description, were of dark igneous rock, gabbro and greenstone, materials whose nearest natural occurrence in that size and character lies in the glacial drift and bedrock of the Lake Superior country, hundreds of miles to the north. Grooved mauls of exactly that form, in exactly those materials, were documented in the ancient pits of the Keweenaw Peninsula and Isle Royale in the middle of the 19th century, recovered in quantities that ran to the thousands. Tools so standardized in weight and form that the surveyors who catalogued them wrote of them the way a quartermaster writes of issued equipment. The tools in the Grant County chamber belonged, in form and in material, to that inventory. They were 400 miles from the pits that produced them, stacked in rows, underground, beside a river that runs to the Mississippi. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. What happened next is the part of the record that the record itself was arranged not to hold, and so it must be reconstructed from the 6 accounts, read against one another, with the gaps named as gaps. On the evening of March 19th, the pit foreman drove into Muscoda and placed a telephone call to the company office in Prairie du Chien. On the morning of the 20th, the crew arrived to find the pit closed and were put to work on the crusher and the stockpiles, away from the face. On the 21st, the day the weekly paper noted the suspension of blasting, a grey sedan with Dane County plates came up the haul road, carrying 2 men the foreman introduced only as being from Madison. The accounts associate them, without documentation, with the state's geological survey, and it should be said plainly that no correspondence, no file, and no report connecting any Madison institution to the site has ever been produced. What the witnesses describe is what they saw from a distance of 100 yards. The two men spent the better part of 2 days at the opening with lamps, a camera, a surveyor's tape, and a plumb line. On the second day, a third man arrived, older, driven up from the direction of the river, and spent an hour inside. In the late afternoon of March 22nd, wooden crates were carried down from a stake bed truck and then carried back up heavier. The mauls went into those crates. So did the copper. None of it has ever been catalogued in any collection any researcher has been able to search. On the morning of March 23rd, the crew was called back to the face. Before work resumed, each man was handed a single typed page and a pen. The men remembered the language imperfectly and remembered the signing exactly. The page spoke of a geological hazard, of liability, and of an agreement not to discuss conditions encountered at the site. Every man signed. Jobs in Grant County in 1963 were not so plentiful that a loader operator argued with a typed page. And then Raymond Holt was instructed to do the thing that, by his own late account, stayed with him for the rest of his life. He was told to drill and load the brow of rock above the opening, and to shoot it, and he did, and 40 feet of broken dolomite came down over the chamber, and the loaders pushed spoil against it for 2 days, and that end of the pit was abandoned. In 1968, the workings elsewhere in the quarry cut below the water table, and the old end of the pit flooded. It is under water now, on private land, behind a fence and a locked gate. The room is still there, the drain is still falling toward the fissure. The soot is still on the ceiling, under the water, under the rock. One thread runs outward from that week, and it involves the only trained researcher known to have come near the site. In late April of 1963, a field archaeologist from Madison, a man then in his mid-30s who had worked the old copper excavations of eastern Wisconsin earlier in his career, arrived in Muscoda and interviewed at least 2 members of the crew. One of them kept the man's handwritten questions. The archaeologist is reported to have drafted a short note intended for the state's archaeological journal. The note never appeared. No draft survives among his donated papers, and his field notebooks for the spring of 1963 are not among them either, though the sequence of notebooks on either side is complete. By that autumn, he had transferred into Highway Salvage Administration, the review of road construction sites, and in the 26 remaining years of his career he did not publish on copper again. Nothing in that career turn is provable as cause and effect. The turn itself is simply there, in the record, dated to the months after Muscoda, and the record offers no other explanation for it. Set against everything else, the Grant County Chamber would matter less if it stood alone. It does not stand alone. 400 miles north, the ancient workings of the Lake Superior Basin are among the most physically documented anomalies in North American history. When mining companies moved into the Keweenaw Peninsula in the 1840s, they found the copper deposits already opened, pit after pit, running along the veins, some of the workings 60 feet deep, with drainage provision, preserved timber, and stone mauls left in extraordinary quantities. In the winter of 1847 to 48, a mine agent named Samuel Knapp, following one of those ancient pits near the Ontonagon River, broke through into an old working and found a detached mass of native copper weighing on the order of 6 tons, raised several feet off the floor of the pit, on a crib of oak timbers, its exposed surfaces pounded smooth where every projecting piece had been hammered off and carried away. The federal geologist Charles Whittlesey surveyed the district systematically and published his findings in 1863, estimating the total copper removed by the ancient miners at between 1.5 and 2 billion pounds. Radiocarbon dating of wood from the old workings, carried out in the 20th century, returned ages between 3,000 and 5,500 years, and across all of it, the surveyors noted the same condition the Muscoda crew noted underground in Grant County. The pits held tools in abundance and held almost nothing of the people, no dwellings at the scale the labor required, no burial grounds to match the workforce, no middens to match the years. The workings were not left in disorder, they were emptied. The second point of comparison lies much closer to the quarry. 30 miles down the Mississippi from the mouth of the Wisconsin River, near Potosi, in the same county as the Muscoda Bluffs, archaeologists in the 1940s and 50s excavated the Osceola site, one of the major cemeteries of what is called the Old Copper Complex, where the remains of hundreds of individuals were recovered, along with copper tools, spear points, knives, and awls, worked from Lake Superior metal. Old copper material from Wisconsin has returned some of the oldest dates for worked metal anywhere in the world, reaching back thousands of years before the pyramids. The conventional account treats these objects as the product of small-scale, intermittent gathering of surface copper. The Grant County Chamber, if the witnesses described it truly, sits inside that account like a stone in a shoe, a surveyed room, an engineered drain, industrial fire setting, standardized tooling in racked rows, a formal closure. These are not the traces of intermittent gathering. They are the traces of an operation, a station on a route, and the route is not hard to read on any map, because the chamber sits above the Wisconsin River, and the Wisconsin River runs to the Mississippi, and the water road from the Superior Country to the Gulf runs past its door. A canoe leaving the Keweenaw could reach that bluff without ever carrying its cargo more than a few miles overland. Whoever cut the room chose the one hillside in the county that the water road touches. There is one object left to account for, and it is the reason this story can be checked at all. On the afternoon of March 22, 1963, before the crates were nailed shut, a loader operator walking back from the crusher line picked one maul off the tailgate of the stake bed truck and set it in the toolbox of his own pickup, and no one stopped him, and he never gave it back. He kept it in a shed in Richland County for the rest of his life, and his family keeps it still. In 1998, it was brought out and shown at a meeting of a county historical society, where it was photographed and measured. It is a grooved maul of dark gabbro, 11 pounds and some ounces, its striking face polished by use to a dull shine, its stone foreign to every outcrop within 200 miles of where it was found. It matches, in form, groove, and material, the mauls recovered by the thousands from the ancient Lake Superior pits. It is not in a federal archive, and it is not under 40 feet of flooded rock. It is on a shelf, in a family's keeping, in southwestern Wisconsin, and it is the one piece of that room that can still be held in a human hand. So the account returns to where it began, to Raymond Holt standing at the rim of a Grant County quarry on the 19th of March, 1963, watching blast dust pour the wrong way, into the hill instead of out of it. What he opened that afternoon, and what was buried again 72 hours later, was a finished room, drained, fireworked, and swept clean, holding the standardized tools of a mining tradition whose home pits lie 400 miles north and whose radiocarbon dates run back 5,000 years, positioned on the water road between the greatest native copper deposit on Earth and the river system that reaches the sea. The shot log with its 3 blank days is in a historical society drawer. The maul is on a family's shelf. The chamber is under the water, exactly where it was left, twice sealed now, once by the people who built it, and once by the people who found it. Taken seriously, that room means the ancient copper operation was not a scatter of surface pickers, but an organized system with stations, standards, and closing procedures, running through the interior of this continent, thousands of years before the accepted timeline allows anyone to be running anything. Someone standing in that room in March of 1963 understood that, and they chose the rubble. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.